So hi everybody and welcome back. As you can see, this is a video where I wanted to compare and make a diecast review, of course, of the brand new Burago Ferrari 330 P4 Daytona 67 that I just took in eBay. It was one of the last news they did in 2024, and I think it's quite interesting because in this specific model I made now I think it's something like 6 or 7 years ago. That model that I made converting a Fujimi kit. Fujimi made a 124 scale P4 in the closed version, no? And I wanted to convert it into the open type, so cutting the roof, modifying all the pillars, and modifying the rear hatch, to make the spider version of the P4. I didn't want to do the specific version because there is several minor differences that I didn't made in my model, but I want to use that in this video. You find plenty of music videos about what I did on that model at the time when I built up the model, and I wanted to use to make a comparison and some considerations around the brand new items, arriving from Burago. As you can clearly see from this angle and images, there is quite big differences, in the interpretation of the body that I think Fujimi spotted incredibly better than the modern Burago. This is a brand new model. I think this type of mistake, and this is a huge mistake. If you look at the front end of the car, look, for example, the position of the lights and so on, it seems that the car has been smashed in the front, instead Fujimi resemble much better the line of the chassis and the line of the shape of the mighty P4, but let's see what Burago did in this model. This is one of their last 2024 news. We are in the end of 2024 when I'm making this video, and of course here it's absolutely clear when you take, for example, a die-cast model, and I took several die-cast models, you have to be extremely objective in what you are taking for. This is a model that is a little bit hot item, because people really was waiting for it, and there is a huge request of this special Ferrari. They are all items made with the modern blah blah blah. As for example, on the box, as you can see here, there is all the royalty paid for Ferrari and importation via Holland, so it's really no longer the Burago company. Burago was a company taking the name from a small village in the east side of the countryside of Milano area, and the name of the city was Burago Molgora, and that's why the company was named this way. I think 20 years ago the company had been overtaken by Chinese companies and they became completely China firm, but the positive stuff of the China firm is that they keep on the idea that Burago had in the beginning to make a cheap die-caster for kids to play. When I was a kid, though, I am a 1973 kid, so and I used to play a lot with Burago toys, so for me it was really also the first experience in making the models before starting with the plastic kits in the higher level of definition. I started to do a lot of die-cast kit, because they had an incredibly nice, exceptional decal sheet inside. So when you build up the kit, and usually it was proposed or in a fantasy livery or something that was a racing version and so on, so not really the most common version. I remember the 250 GTO from Ferrari, and in scale it was a strange version. It was the blue one with the yellow nose that was, yes, a real version, but not so popular as the classical red stuff. Probably they wanted to keep a different line from the already finished stuff that they sell in the proper box, in the black box that back in time Burago had it, and the kit, that was ready for a slightly different audience. I was already at the time in the slightly different audience, but as I was saying, the positive stuff is that Burago keeping on making models in 124 and in smaller and bigger scale, also 18 and 43 and also 64. They have the possibility nowadays, paying the royalty, to have the access to the 3D files. That's why, for example, if you take modern cars, new Lamborghini, new Ferrari, of course, all the new Ferrari, they have an incredibly spotted and well done line at once. I mean, I just buy them mostly for the lines that they get, Instead, those types of company completely lack down and make a huge mistake, like in this specific stuff, when they cannot have any kind of 3D professional drawings and design, so they have to do something in their own way, making their own design, and that's when the problem arrives. Where the problem occurs, is when you have to do your own shape. In reality, that was a masterpiece probably for many, not only for me. It have been the nicest Ferrari that ever existed, despite it was barely a racer car. In reality, they exist only 4 cars. Many say 3.5 because they consider the chassis 846 from Jim Glickenhaus kind of replica, while in my opinion is not so much a replica. It's a really the 846 burned by Chris Amon in the testing of Le Mans 67. So I consider that car, despite it was completely burned and rebuilt, absolutely an original. And Jim Glickenhaus is a lover of this car, so I think it's absolutely unfair to show up a kind of jealousy because he owns a real one that should not be the real one. There is other 3 or ones around the world, but the problem is not around the price. You see that you never seen in auction a real P4. You see many other cars, you see Miura, you see GTOs, you never see a P4 because of this restricted reality of number. Already 412, that was the Clienti version of the P4 with a slightly different power, slightly different wheels, the injection was different, Lucas versus the other, so it was a slightly different car, despite the line was extremely similar, nearly identical, for the external part. So when they don't have the possibility to access to an official file provided by the company about, like this car burned in 1967 but designed probably in 64, 65 and 67, arriving like a develop of what in modern car can be the 499p, you cannot have a real documentation, a proper documentation. So that's why probably the mistakes occurs. And of course, later on we will see about the details of the car that is in the classical Burago style, so nothing good, nothing bad. Swedish used to say lagom, they say is in the middle way, and the biggest mistakes ever, like I said, it was about the front end. The front end is totally different. You see, that is the one spotted by Fujimi, that I made it in my way, adding a little bit of rivets that they anyway became a little bit heavy anyway. In reality this was rivets that was I think 1 or 2 millimeters, so incredibly small, because all the body of the car was made in aluminium, it was not made in fiberglass and so on. Instead, in the model provided by Burago, the rivets are like real pins, they are huge. They don't respect at all any scheme of the real rivets featuring over the car. There I copied exactly what you can see, and I think I used at the time the picture for the refurbishment that Jim Glickenhaus made over his one, because he made an incredibly nice footage in PDF that I downloaded lifetime ago, and it was absolutely easy to follow what he did, so you really know where the points of the spots are, despite this is barely fantasy. Second point is, for example, I don't want to do this video showing that I am much better modeler than them. It's just about the documentation that you have when you do this type of models. Look, for example, at the windshield. The windshield, of course, the details of the wiper cannot be made like in a photo etch set like I did here. Of course, it cannot be. But, for example, already the shape looks much more similar to a Foreman P4, so it's much more different in the design of the shape. The same stuff about the deepness of the side air intakes, Fujimi and Burago. Not to mention, for example, that the rear coverage of the motor is slightly different too. They also had a huge, there they tried probably to keep a correct riveting points, over the rear parts. It's quite similar. They made that big long L that was not there. I made it that way. I also placed the hinges over there. That was, of course, part of the conversion when you cut the closed version of the P4 provided by Fujimi. Then I added a photo etched set on the door. That, of course, in a cheaper model like Burago is, it cannot be available. Of course, this is not because of Burago. This is for the level of the toy, I dare to say, that you are going to buy. Of course, the interior you cannot compare to a serious interior, with proper seat belts, fasteners. I also played the helmet of Chris Amon there, and the proper colors, And I remember that at the time, I think that is still there. If you can see, there was the photo etched set for the gear shifter, down there on a side like it should be on a P4. Instead, here, of course, You cannot have that type of details, you know, there is just a plastic, I dare to say a plastic dick coming up from the side, you know, and the seat belt is something like that. There is one line, one black line. Come on, guys, you know, Burago. You cannot expect so much in the cockpits. Finally, for example, still considering the level of, I'm just talking about the overall shape, and I think all these issues come from, as I say, the lack of a proper documentation. I see them when China company works with the proper 3D stuff, with the proper 3D design, and they don't have absolutely, I don't dare to say the possibility, they don't have probably the time or the availability to pay proper designer to do this stuff, you know, because it's a long work to make the proper design in a proper 3D. You need usually the best ever is to have a real car, but you know, in modern world, as I said, there is just replicas or you copy plastic models that usually they are quite decent. You know, I just recently sold the P4 from Model Factory here in 112, and that shape, despite some guys say that the front end for a Spider version was not properly correct, but it was anyway a nearly perfect shape. If you see the finished line of the P4 made in 112 by Hero is super, so probably you have to use that shape and try to see if you can work it down and make it in a smaller scale, or make it directly the buying and try to take inspiration from the 124 kit, even from Model Factory Hero. Because, you know, if you take instead this type of object, I think that nowadays, despite this is brand new, so as you can see the paint is also wrong, because from my telephone, you know, I don't have a ultra quality iPhone for the images. As you can see from my video, I have an ordinary Xiaomi telephone, so the camera is what it is and the light is this huge bulb that I have over there. But in real colors, you know, I can warranty you that this color that they used for this P4 is nearly similar to Michael Schumacher red, despite in reality, being a paint from 1967, the paint was much more dark, it was more... Here I made personally the mistake to make it even too much glossy, you know, because if you see the car in reality in so many pictures, the car is... not so well taken care like an ordinary street car. It was a racer, so we always have to remember that. Final part, look the width of the back, you know, it's much wider, the Fujimi version, that I think is much more correct, despite they made this final part of the car closing in this direction, you know, is much more narrow than what it should be. The P4 was a huge car, so the rear back part of the car was absolutely huge, as well as the air intake going over the 12 cylinder, you know, it was made in this way. Of course, I scratch builded this part because this is not part of the Fujimi kit, so all this part have been made by me, and I tried, of course, like I do in all my models, to copy the proper details of such parts. This is what Burago tried to do, you know, placing also other rivets there that I never seen in the car. So I think that so far this is probably the most disappointing model I ever took from this collection. It is sad to admit. I mean, as I said, when I do this type of video, look the difference in the shape and in the width. Look, seems another car, since that something is missing. It's neither a replica, because, you know, usually the Foreman P4, or even better the Norwood P4, that are the best replicas around. Texas made a search for it, Google for it, Norwood. They made incredibly nice copies of the P4 using Ferrari mechanical parts coming from the 550 Maranello type, so 12 cylinders, so it's resembling a lot the real stuff, you know. And to avoid issues about royalties and so on, they changed it, making it longer and wider, I think 5 millimeters than the real stuff. So it's really something that is not so noticeable in the real car. But of course we are talking of a replica that nearly cost $1 million, so it's on that type. So who spends $1 million to own a replica? So you also have to consider that type of client. So is what you can get in real world when you really want to go deep and you say, no, fuck man, I have money, I want absolutely to have a P4 in my collection. So the Norwood P4 was a British conversion that they made. For example, the Norwood P4 is the body that you see in the movie Ford versus Ferrari, you know. It was the body made by Norwood, optimized by RCR in Michigan, you know. It was a company that was so much in love many years ago. They also sent me a jacket, you know, for the company. And they made that model because, of course, if you make a movie, you need something that is resembling a car. And of course, in the picture, in the images, with some computer touching and so on, the car looked incredibly real, but in reality, it was a Foreman P4, so it's slightly smaller, not so correct in the proportion. Remember that here you are talking of one of the most I also dare to say unknown object produced by Ferrari, because at the time they didn't have, like they do today, the willing to make, like, for example, from an hypercar also the street version. I know that in my production I made back in time the NSX, the Acura NSX GT3, and while talking to one of these friends that I have in the company, there is a collector that wanted badly, I think it was in Turkey, this guy, that wanted badly to have a NSX GT3 road plated. So, if you have the millionaire that want to pay for it, you simply do it. At the time it was not this way. This was a racer. It was really like... if you want to road plate a Formula 1 car, the level was absolutely the same, probably even more, because in the sports car, that was the name of the series at the time, sports car, this was neither available, so they just made it for racing purpose and so on. That's why there is not so much knowing about who is the designer of that. Many say, Pininfarina, absolutely not. Nearly nobody knows. It was a nearly mysterious designer from Modena named Zama, was the designer of that. The same for the Dino 206. The designer is barely unknown, so everybody say, design Pininfarina, it was not at all. So, as you can see, there is so many unknown level and unknown stuff on this super Ferrari, the definitive racer. She was the one arriving in Daytona 67, showing up. That's why everybody wanted to do the car 23, because it was the spider arriving in the picture that you can Google if you search for a Daytona, Last but not least, the front end radiator. That was what Fujimi suggests and proposed in her model. This is what Burago made. You see, seems a joke if you compare also the front end. Seems a joke. They made it narrow there, the kind of arrow ending there. The front end is this way. Not to mention the front blades there. Of course, they are made in huge metal. I made it in aluminum, like a photo etch said. The color of the wheel, last but not least, this is kind of brownish. They didn't make the proper color. The car is not fixed to this base, so I cannot move it too much. And of course the proper locker to the rest of the axle, So that's it. It's a little bit disappointing. I mean, I don't have so many regrets, because as usual from Burago you can get this item for around, I paid slightly more, because I just wanted to buy it before as soon as possible. I really wanted to do this type of video to show the differences between either to say professionally built, but this is something that everybody can do, taking the Fujimi model, making a conversion. I think there was also an American company providing for you the conversion already done with the frame, with the rear hatch, so that was the biggest issues point ever, that you had with the creation of this model, because actually I think, excluding probably the model factory here in 124, is not so easy to have a spider version of the P4. Everybody have a closed P4. That was the other two cars arriving even in Daytona. And that's it. The overall dimension in the length at least are respected, not in the width. And that's it. So I have not so many regrets in buying this stuff, but so far this P4, and it is their last new of the year, we are in the end, as I said in the beginning of my video, 2024, is so far the worst ever model I get from Burago collection. That's it, guys. Hope this video helps you in your choice when you want to do something for the collection and so on. My tip is always, if you have a decent modeling skill, always go for something that you can build up by yourself. Use your hands. Use your hands. You can do absolutely something. If I did that, you can do absolutely something similar or even better. Absolutely no problem in that. So, guys, keep on, and this is what happens when you don't have access to modern documentation as for model cars and so on. That's it. Thanks for watching, guys. See you in the next one.